Even though it's been around for 6 years, I'd never heard of Podcasting 2.0 until a couple of weeks ago. I've been looking into it, and it has some implications for communicators, especially if podcasting is part of your content mix. What is it? If you don't already know, and I didn't, you'll find out in this short midweek episode of For Immediate Release.
Another fine podcast from the FIR Podcast Network.
This is For Immediate Release, the podcast for communicators.
Hi everyone, and welcome to For Immediate Release. This is episode 522. I'm Neville Hobson.
I'm Shel Holtz, and Neville, we've been doing this show for more than 21 years. When we started, there were maybe 400 podcasts. There was no Apple podcast to help people find and subscribe to shows, and every podcaster was what today they seem to be calling an indie podcaster. What's not an indie podcaster? That would be Joe Rogan, for example, on Spotify, collecting money. He's not an indie, he's mainstream media. So I try to follow the podcast industry. I subscribe to some newsletters. I read some people who talk about it. But somehow I only recently encountered Podcasting 2.0. This thing has been around since 2020. Despite the name, it's not a new audio format. It's not a new app or a replacement for RSS. It's an open source movement launched by, guess who? Adam Curry, the podcasting pioneer, along with a developer named Dave Jones. God, there's a lot of Dave Joneses out there. Its mission is to preserve, protect, and extend the open podcasting ecosystem. Now, that word open matters. Traditional podcasting works because creators like us publish an RSS feed that many different apps can read. Nobody has to upload a separate master copy to each player. But over time, discovery and listening have become concentrated in large corporate directories and platforms like Apple, increasingly Spotify, Amazon, and YouTube, but there are others. These companies set their own rules for their own services. Spotify's rules explicitly say that it can remove content and suspend or terminate accounts. You could call that moderation, deplatforming, censorship. There's no denying the underlying power these services have. Spotify can remove a podcast from Spotify. If the creator independently controls the RSS feed and hosting, Spotify can't erase the podcast from the entire internet. The danger comes when creators and audiences become so dependent on one proprietary platform that removal there is effectively removal from public view. Podcasting 2.0 was designed to reduce that gatekeeper risk. Its answer isn't that every app has to carry every show. It's that no single app or company should be able to make a show disappear everywhere. Now, the initiative has several major pieces. The podcast index is an open directory that apps can use instead of depending on one company's catalog. I checked, and FIR is listed, as are our other active shows on the FIR Podcast Network. Podcast namespace adds new backward-compatible tags to RSS feeds. Those tags could provide creator-controlled transcripts, richer chapters, information about hosts and guests, live stream notifications, alternate audio and video versions, licensing information, and a pod roll of shows creators recommend. Remember, blog rules? This is pod rules. There's also pod ping, which alerts apps quickly when a feed changes. And there's a really much discussed thing called value for value. It's a model that lets listeners support creators directly, often through tiny Bitcoin payments called sats, S-A-T-S, and attach messages known as boosts or boostograms. And yeah, I was listening to the Podcasting 2.0 show with Curry and Jones, and they were shouting out everybody who gave them a boost. The Bitcoin element gets disproportionate attention, but it's optional. Podcasting 2.0 is much broader than cryptocurrency. And by the way, there's a vertical market application of Podcasting 2.0 called Godcaster. That's a defined community of religious podcasters who have embraced Podcasting 2.0. The question is whether this model could work for, say, corporate ecosystems, universities, trade groups, nonprofits, and the like. And that explains why communicators should care, or at least know about all this, because this really is a conversation about channel ownership, interoperability, accessibility, and resilience. Accurate transcripts improve access and make our content easier to search and reuse. Chapters and person tags make expertise more discoverable. Pod rules let organizations recommend trusted voices without surrendering discovery to Spotify or YouTube and their algorithms. And open distribution reduces the risk of building an audience on rented space. Now, there are caveats. Support remains uneven. I didn't even learn about it until a couple of weeks ago. Hosts like Libsyn, which hosts FIR, and podcasting apps implement different subsets of the standards. Open infrastructure doesn't eliminate legal obligations. It doesn't change hosting company policies or other choke points. And decentralization doesn't automatically make a content accurate, ethical, or responsible. But the core idea is important, and that's that podcasting began as an open medium, not a collection of corporate content silos. Podcasting, too, is an effort to modernize that open model without giving up what made podcasting distinctive in the first place. For communicators, the lesson extends well beyond audio. Distribute widely, but retain control of the source, the identity, and the relationship with the audience.
Yeah, it's quite a story, Shell, I think. It's something I, like you, I hadn't really heard of this other than the fact I did come across Podcasting 2.0 website when Adam Curry launched it back in, what was it, 2021,
yep.
2020. But since then, no, haven't heard anything about this at all, really, other than some kind of side comments here and there on a couple of tech podcasts. And I'm thinking what you've outlined or makes complete sense. Demis, so why hasn't this been thought about before, even? I think it has in part. I've read people talking about this online, particularly on making content more easily consumable as they see it. And there we're talking about an idea that's not new. Apple's been offering this for a while, which is chapters, splitting up your content into chapters. But that's only Apple. It doesn't transport. And therein lies one of the issues with this, I think, that it kind of, how could you say, there are some concerns I can see. I'll come on to the pros in a minute. But I think, is this not fragmentation of something that's going to require quite a bit of a learning curve to figure out what to do with this? I'm also thinking that, is this going to open another standards race? Open standards only work if enough people adopt them. Otherwise, there is becoming another well-intentioned technical layer that only enthusiasts use. We've seen that. But thought, a kind of broader question, that's a top layer question. Are we looking at the next stage in podcasting's evolution? Or are these features primarily serving podcast creators rather than podcast listeners? In other words, who's getting the greatest benefit? That's what I'm wondering. And I think it does, the fragmentation issue, I think, creates complexity. Features, bolting on new features, more metadata, doesn't compensate for weak storytelling. You've got to have that sorted out. And I think there's a risk of enthusiasts becoming excited by all this while listeners simply want worthwhile content. The interesting thing, though, and you pointed this out in your intro, that where we're at now with podcasting is the kind of marketplace is largely controlled or dominated by big platforms. You mentioned Spotify, you mentioned Apple. If we go to look at the analytics on Libsyn as to how people get our content, there's a long list of 20 plus podcast platforms. Some of them never even heard of, yet you can imagine an episode has got 6 downloads on that platform and 200 and something on another platform. So it's like we like to say, listen to us wherever you get your podcasts. So how do we introduce this into that landscape in a way that literally isn't complexity from the fragmentation, because it will be fragmentation, and who's to say that Spotify and the others aren't going to respond not in a positive way to this, because this is their control slipping away. So this is what I spot as some of the issues. I think another standards race is maybe more concern. One of podcasting's great strengths has always been its relative simplicity. Wasn't like that when we started, mind you, but that's how it is today. This introduced another layer of standard, certification, and implementation. We've seen this before. Social media standards, RSS extensions, schema markup, countless proprietary platform features. So it's not a pretty looking landscape, I would say. Plus, as we've talked about this ourselves, but others are talking about this. This is podcasting's time. It's going to play a bigger role in organizational communication, where we're saying that a podcast would complement particularly relatively new use within organizations for employee communication. So how does this all work, where you've suddenly got these things that sound very appealing to creators? I think probably not so much from listeners who sense complexity is what they'll be looking at. So you've got to make it very easy and simple. That said, I think there are some big advantages from it. You've mentioned some. One that strikes me immediately: richer, more accessible content. Turns an audio file into more complete communication asset, it seems to me. So transcripts, chapters, structured metadata makes the podcast easier. And this is a big appeal, Shell, I would say. Easier to search, easier to quote, easier to repurpose, easier to reference internally, and make accessible to people who cannot or don't want to listen to something. So you make it broader. So you could also say many organizations already struggle to maximize the value of long-form content. These features make it much easier to reuse a single conversation across newsletters, blogs, social posts, knowledge bases, internal communication. We're always talking about content reuse as communicators. Podcasting 2.0 makes that much easier because the structure is built into the episode itself. There's tons more we could talk about in this vein, but I think that's enough for now. I think there are some major cons that would worry me if I were thinking about, let's see how we can take advantage of this. It's got a homebrew feel about it, which isn't a criticism by any means. That's how podcasting started. The landscape's way different now. I could see a big role for AI in constructing the landscape, if you like, of helping you bring this into your plans. But it's a big work to get this done, it seems to be.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge that Curry and Jones face with this is building awareness and support. I'm a podcaster for 21 years and hadn't heard of it. You heard about it when it launched and heard nothing since then. There's a serious awareness from here, and that's what's going to keep this from broader adoption. I'm not worried about fragmentation. Podcasting started with the extension in the RSS feed. This is something that Dave Weiner came up with, working hand in hand with Adam Curry, who developed the podcatcher that would recognize that extension that Weiner created. This did not render those RSS feeds useless to the RSS newsreaders that were out there. They still got them. They just ignored that extension because they didn't have any way of playing a media file. So they still saw it. I have to believe that an RSS feed with all the new stuff in it is still going to be an effective RSS feed. The problem is that you have the hosting services. As I mentioned, we have been hosted with Libsyn, not since the very beginning, but pretty darn close to the very beginning. And they have embraced some of what the new extensions for the RSS feed are, and not others. Podbean or any of the other hosting services may adopt different sets of them and not all of them. Even Spotify apparently has accepted a couple of them, but not all of them. The problem, though, I think, is the convenience. If you make Spotify the place you go for podcasts, and they're listening to FIR, and we say something offensive, and they decide to take us off, they're not going to go look for us elsewhere. They're just going to find other podcasts because they use Spotify. You do a deal with Spotify, and you got to be pretty good, pretty famous, guarantee a lot of downloads. But if you do a deal with Spotify, that's the only place people are going to find that podcast. And again, you do something violates the terms of service or their standards, and they take you off, then you're off. You're gone everywhere. So I like the idea of this standard. I would just like to see some agreement across all of the hosting platforms and the discovery platforms that we will enable all of these on our platform so that listeners get the benefit. And you articulated some of those benefits to the listener. They don't have to know that's courtesy of Podcasting 2.0 any more than they need to understand that there's an extension in the RSS feed in Podcasting 1.0. They just know that this is what they get when they subscribe to a podcast. But I love the idea of they're not having to go to the show notes on our website to get the transcript. And frankly, I like the idea of people who love the show being able to support it with a micropayment that sends a message to us. I think that enhances the listener-podcaster relationship more than just commenting on a LinkedIn post or on our website or whatever. So, yeah, I think there's a lot to recommend this, but I think there are lots of obstacles in the way. And as you mentioned, there are also issues that don't get resolved because of this.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think to go back to your point where you started this line on communication or an awareness raising, I couldn't agree more. The trouble is, who's going to do that? Who's going to decide what the message is, let's say? And I think if it's like when podcasting appeared, that's real homebrew stuff. It's individuals doing it and they'll communicate. What are we going to communicate, though? Are we going to say, all these bells and whistles, it's going to be wonderful. You can do this and this long bullet point list, without any indication that's actually going to work, and you don't have to devote weeks and months to figuring something out before you launch it. Plus, another angle, of course, is what happens to existing stuff. Yeah, okay, it should work, but here's me, the organizational communicator, about to invest significant money into developing a podcast. I need guarantees of that. I need something better than it should work. So I think there's huge barriers in the way. So that's got to be looked at. I think the thing that excites me about this idea more than anything is AI discoverability and structured transcripts, as I mentioned, chapters, metadata, make podcasts easier for AI systems to understand. It's not about RSS feeds. I'm not sure what it's about in a sense. Search engines, AI assistants, enterprise search knowledge tools, they need structured content rather than an MP3 file. Now, is in RSS feeds, the XML in RSS feeds, that's structured content? I don't know. Would that work with this? I'm not sure. But podcasts with really rich metadata is way more likely to become part of the AI knowledge ecosystem. And that's where search is heading. And it is, I do this, you do it. And most people I know now do this. When you're searching for something, you go to, I have to say, I find this the easiest way I do this now, which on Chrome, I use the AI assistant in Chrome, which is Gemini, actually. I don't just type in the search bar, I click on that, and I then get AI tool interface, and I ask it questions, and it then, we to and fro, back and forth with stuff. It's fabulous. It's easy. You can save the content to your Google Drive, stuff like that. So it actually makes it, instantly how this is going to work. And over time, you evolve your method of asking the questions. So it needs to be built into that. So AI isn't just searching podcasts, it's understanding them. That may be stretching the point of it, but I think that's probably accurate. It's not just looking for keywords, it's understanding context and meaning. So structured podcast data, I think, is likely to become just as important as good SEO once was. So that I think is worth looking at. And now, from a listener point of view, I actually, in the absence of communication, I see nothing but pain here for the listener. I don't think this is the debate at the moment, from what I'm seeing and looking through some of the links you shared. I don't see an awful lot in there talking about benefits to listeners. It's platform advantage. Your points about Spotify, to be critical of Spotify, I've never liked their approach. I don't use Spotify myself. But the rigidity of, you've got to do it just like this. And the stories you hear anecdotally of someone by mistake did something and boom, they're gone. And then they repeal it and maybe about 3 weeks later it comes back. That's power plays from a big platform, and that doesn't have a place in all of this, it seems to me. So I don't know how this is all going to work, Shah. It's exciting, I have to say, but there's clearly issues to address here.
Yeah, and I'm sure Dave Jones is a developer, so I'm sure he's working on all of this and probably has answers to some of those questions. I think it's largely in his and Adam Curry's hands to get the word out about this. If I were them, or if I were counseling them, I would suggest that the audience that you need to be aiming at is podcasters, the creators. And the message is, tell your hosting service that you want these features implemented. The more they hear this and the more they see their customers changing hosting platforms to one that does embrace all of this, the faster they're going to adopt the standard, and this will work for everybody. But I don't see that effort underway. And I would advise listeners, if you're curious about this, visit their Podcasting 2.0 website, but also give a listen to the Podcasting 2 podcast. It's typical Adam Curry. There's a lot of digression and a lot of talk about completely off-topic subjects. But when they do zero in on Podcasting 2.0, it's really interesting to hear them talk about this and where it is and where it's going.
I would say, Libsyn, we'll be in touch.
You can count on it. And that'll be a 30 for this episode of For Immediate Release.